Today I'm joined by Dr. Thomas Schreiner, who is a James Buchanan Harrison Professor of New Testament Interpretation at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Today we're discussing this new book by Dr. Schreiner, Christ Crucified, A Theology of Galatians. So I'm very happy to have him join me. So, you've written this book here in a new series of books from Crossway. There's several of them. You've written two of them, this one and the one on Revelation, both of which are good, by the way. Let's talk a little bit about this series of books that you are editing with Brian Rosner, and maybe tell me something about what you're trying to accomplish in this volume on Galatians.
Yeah, well, the series, I think the idea for the series, it's like a cut below the New Studies of Biblical Theology series. So we wanted something that was a little more accessible. I mean, we think that other series is fantastic, but we wanted something a little more accessible for pastors and students and ordinary readers. And as you can see, the books are rather brief so that they're accessible and shorter and a way to introduce students to biblical theology. And really, it was Crossway's idea. I did this book on Revelation. I was giving these lectures at Moore College, and they want you to produce a book out of it. And I wrote the book on Revelation. Well, of course, I never made it there because it was during the pandemic. And then so I published that book, and then I went back to Moore. I finally got to Moore. It's the second time I've been there, but I gave these lectures at Moore here just in August. And I wasn't going to write two volumes in the series, but I think it's in the preface. But someone dropped out, and Crossway encouraged me to do it. And so, yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time on the law and on, Romans, Pauline theology. I'd written a commentary on Galatians. So it was pretty much a natural for me to dive into it.
Yeah, and I've benefited from your work on Galatians over the years, a very helpful commentary. When Paul starts out Galatians, and we'll talk about the law, but before we get there, he talks about the gospel, and he warns against another gospel. What do you think Paul has in view there? And maybe that can even help us contextualize how to read the book of Galatians in some sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important when we read Galatians to recognize that Paul is responding to false teachers. Of course, this is typical in virtually all the Pauline letters, but it's very apparent in Galatians that we have outside teachers who've come in. I think they are from the outside. We have indications of that. They've come from the outside. They're troubling the congregation. And it's clear as we read the close, as we engage in what is called mirror reading, reflecting back what is in the letter, that they're advocating circumcision for salvation and the observance of the law. And at least I always say to my students, for people today, I mean, none of us have ever met anyone who thinks you need to be circumcised to be saved. At least I never have. But when we read Genesis 17, 9 through 14, it's very clear in that text that circumcision is required to be a covenant member. And it's very clear in that text that it's to be physical. It's in the flesh of your foreskin. So I think it's quite plausible that the opponents, adversaries, agitators, whatever you want to call them, came in and said, hey, this is what the Bible says. And Paul did not tell you this presumably because he wanted to please you and he wanted to make it easier for you. He didn't tell you what the Bible actually said. And of course, circumcision is the first step to keeping the entire law as well.
So could you, in brief scope, summarize if Paul in Galatians was to say, here's my gospel, what is that gospel?
Yeah, I think, I mean, of course, that's a huge question, right? What the gospel is. But I think Paul, the fundamentals, when we get to Galatians is, I think Paul poses a dichotomy. We could say an apocalyptic dichotomy or an eschatological dichotomy. I think it's both. And I think he'd say, how do we enter the people of God? Is it by circumcision or by the cross and the resurrection? So, and his answer is, and again in Galatians, his answer is, we enter by the cross. Therefore, we do not enter the people of God. We do not enter the covenant people. We're not part of the family of Abraham by what we do as human beings, by observance of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ, who died on the cross to remove the curse from us, Galatians 3:13, because we who are Galatians 4, we come into the world as those who are under the law, and those who are under the law are under sin. So that we need to be redeemed from that curse. And so salvation, justification is by faith, not by works of the law. So I hold quite a traditional reformational Protestant reading of what Paul is doing in Galatians, which isn't, I mean, in some circles, it's not very popular today.
Well, you make a good case for it.